Welcome to the People Are People podcast, Life Lessons Learned in Real Time. I am your host, Lexi Mahari. Thank you for taking the time to give your ears over to my personal thoughts about life, people, and the lessons each one has to offer. In this episode, we are going to keep it light and touch on some of the last few weeks' hot topics. I was going to say this week's, but these are things that have actually happened over the last few weeks, and some things that you're probably fairly familiar with, other things maybe not. But each week, I would like to release an episode that's a little light. Maybe still a little thought provoking, maybe not so thought provoking for some of you, but just to share my opinion about some things that are happening in this world. So let's begin with Sherri Shepherd, who in a People podcast is actually the People in the 90s podcast. Former View and current Dish Nation co host Sherri Shepherd shared her experience as a struggling actress and comedian during the 90s and the early thousands or millennium, for those of you who have been around for a while, in which she auditioned for numerous parts and she became known as, that black girl, she says, that was on all of the white shows. She would tell people that if you see a black girl in the background walking through, that's probably me. So Sherri spoke of her appearance on Friends, and she said the following. In the People in the 90s podcast, Shepherd spoke of her appearance on Friends, in which she said the following. I had a wonderful time on Friends. I really did. They were so really, really wonderful. She also appeared on Living Single, the show that is said to have inspired Friends, for those of you who may not know that. Um, Living Single was a show in which actually Queen Latifah starred in alongside of Erica Alexander, Kim Coles, Kim Fields, and the male actors were John Hinton, T.C. Carson, and that one guy, Mel Jackson. I think he later joined the cast. But this was about a group of Black professionals and entrepreneurs who lived in New York. Imagine that in an apartment setting. And so Sherri actually had I think, the unique experience of having been on both shows. As it relates to the show Friends, Shepherd allegedly said that executive producers said she was amazing and that they had to have her back. But she says, amazingly, no one ever called her back. She was worried that she actually might have offended someone and that she would have loved to have gone back because it was truly a great experience. But, nonetheless, she points out the thing that, captured many African Americans' attention back at that time. And I think even today, it comes up, Friends is still around. It's airing somewhere, I imagine, as we speak. And the thing that caught so many African Americans, I would imagine some Caucasians as well, some Latinas, Latinos, was the fact that this show, which was based in New York, one of perhaps the most diverse cities in this country, if not the world, but here you had a cast of, you know, all white actors, and there wasn't a lot of diversity that they seemed to bump into on the show, living in New York. I can tell you, I just really could never get into the show. I can remember college watch parties for this show. That's how huge it was. People, and I know I'm dating myself, but back in the olden days, people would gather around the television set in their dorms and they would have watch parties for this show. I believe it came on every Thursday night. Meanwhile, the rest of us kind of flocked to Living Single and, other shows that kind of aligned with our cultural background as well. But Sherri, and I'm paraphrasing, she points out that, for a show set in New York, and despite the fact that New York was notorious for its diversity, um, this show did not look a whole lot like the city in which it took place. I know I probably felt like I was the only one who didn't watch this show, but for that very reason, right? I think a lot of the things that we watch on television, at the movies, on our laptops, on our phones, there's so many ways to watch television shows or series now. I don't even know if they're calling them television shows anymore. or movies is, you look for something within a movie to identify with. For some of us, those of us who are very visual, we look for that person who looks like us, right? Or we look for some semblance of our family in a movie. Um, Now, you know, real talk, sometimes we just look for an emotion or something in a character and we identify with them, or perhaps our favorite celebrity or artist is in a movie. That is very well true as well. But for most of us, we're visual, we're looking for that thing that we can relate to. And for me, unfortunately, Friends was not that show. It's not to say that I never ever saw an episode. Of course, I caught snippets of episodes over the years while it was on, and I thought it actually looked fairly funny. I was definitely a fan of a lot of the actors. I had known of most of them before they were on the show. I remember David Schwimmer from The Wonder Years. I believe he was the boyfriend of Kevin's sister. I remembered Courtney Cox from Family Ties. She played Alex Keaton's girlfriend. And of course, who can forget her in the Bruce Springsteen video? I know I'm really dating myself. And then, of course, Matt LeBlanc, I remembered him from Married with Children, not on a whole lot of episodes, but his character was memorable, right? And then, of course, Matthew Perry, again, not on a lot of these episodes, but I remembered him from Growing Pains. So, these are actors and actresses that, I definitely had some awareness for before the big splash on the series Friends. But, I just thought it was interesting that, as an actress who had been on this show, she still kind of pointed out that, despite they were wonderful people, great experience, but a little disappointed that there was a lack of diversity on such an amazing show. And I don't want to take that away from them. Clearly, it's a part of, I think, the American culture for some people, and it's just a little disappointing that they didn't have more diversity at the time. I did want to take a moment to say rest in peace to Biz Markie and prayers to his family. The rapper passed away last week at the age of 57. It's unfortunate that we have lost yet another rapper. Just a few months after losing DMX. One of Biz Markie's biggest hits, "Just a Friend," is definitely a part of the soundtrack of my life. I can hear that song and be transported back into time. He made us laugh, and his music brought joy. Of course, I just want to point out that he was more than just that song. Um, and to quote, Vulture.com, he is and was a pioneer of hip hop music and will be missed by many people. But he's definitely gifted us with a lot of memories. So rest in peace to Biz Markie. Okay, so let's switch gears. Another part of my light show, and I know that was not a lighter moment that we just went through, but one of the things that I want to include in my show or in my podcast is talk about things that I'm seeing on Netflix or Hulu. A lot of people talk about the things that they bump into with reality television, the syndicated series. But I kind of want to talk about, some of the things that was on our streaming services. Now, I don't have a subscription to every streaming service. I think it's insane the number of options we have out there now. I miss the good old days sometimes when maybe there were just three. But that's okay. With options comes variety, right? And all that stuff I was just rambling about a few minutes ago about diversity. It also helps to give us access to diversity. But I digress. So, Netflix. So what am I watching on Netflix? Oh my gosh, I'm a busy person, so it can be difficult for me to catch a whole lot on Netflix. But I did want to call out Fear Street. Now, I am behind as usual in this series. I believe they're probably on the third one by now. I know that at the time of recording this podcast, they were releasing the third um, promo, the third promo for the installment of this series. But if you're not familiar with it, Fear Street is based on a young adult book series by R.L. Stine that presents the tale of a haunted town that crosses over multiple decades and generations. The first installment that I saw focused on the 90s, and I was hooked simply because of the diversity of the cast. Imagine that. You see, diversity is important. Sometimes again, you just want to be able to identify with someone in the cast. But anywho, I don't want to spoil the plot, so that's one thing you won't have to worry about for me, unless you're behind in watching something. Particularly if I ever get into a series, I'm not going to spoil the plots because I hate when people do that. But what I will say about part one is that if you are a child of the 80s or the 90s or even the 70s, and you came along at a time when horror movies, they were the thing, you will appreciate this series. It's has its cheesy moments. I appreciate the time period. It's true to the time frame in which it's taking place, but it gives you vibes of Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th, Scream vibes. If you like that kind of classic horror flick, then you will enjoy it. This series makes you yell at the screen. It makes you yell at the characters. The great part about it, especially the first one, I'm not so sure yet about the second part. I'm still working through part two, but there's definitely the option to play who done it, right? You're trying to figure out what the heck is going on initially in part one. Um, so, I encourage you to check it out. What I will say about part two so far is that, I've had some issues connecting with it a little bit, but, I always feel like, again, as a fan of horror flicks, anytime there's a sequel, part two is kind of it can be a little risky, right? Part two is rarely as good as part one. Um, but hey, some of you out there might disagree with that. I'm trying to think of a movie where part two was just as good as part one. Usually part one is good, part two gets a little iffy. If you think back through the horror flick genre, and part three usually brings it. So, we'll see how this goes. I do plan to get through part two this week, and I'll be picking up part three when it becomes available, or, if it's available already. Um, so would I recommend that you check this out? As I said before, absolutely. Remember to go into this series with low expectations and you will be fine. So on Hulu, I watched the film False Positive starring Pierce Brosnan, Justin Theroux, and Sophia Bush. And, honestly, I jumped in to watch this movie just because of Pierce Brosnan. Again, someone who's kind of been around since I was a kid. Again, about to date myself, but I still remember him from Remington Steele. Imagine that. But it was a good movie. Pierce Brosnan, he played creepy quite well. He plays a creepy fertility physician, Dr. Hindle, who helps a couple to become pregnant via artificial insemination. I can't get that out. Let me try that again. So he plays a creepy fertility physician who helps a couple to become pregnant via artificial insemination. The couple learns that they're having triplets, and so they have to make this decision about what to do. Because they really want to ensure that they have a healthy pregnancy. Now, I know this can create some controversial thoughts and opinions for anyone who might be listening right now. I'm just giving the plot of the movie. So the couple has to make a decision about whether or not they want to keep the twins that they're carrying, or if they're twin boys, or if they're going to save the girl who is just a singleton type of pregnancy. And so things take this crazy twist for Lucy and her husband, Adrian, as this fertility's doctor's actions lead to a series of revelations and unexpected events. So, what will I say about this particular movie? Hey, if you like Lifetime movies, you'll love this movie. No shade, just my opinion. Okay, so shifting gears to Karen Watch. It seems we've had a very active period of Karen incidents. They're on the uptick again. Oh boy, folks. So I would be remiss, not to bring up the two separate events that caught my attention over the last 2 weeks. And I imagine by the time this podcast is released, there will probably be many, many more. So let's start with the Jersey Victoria's Secret's Karen, who allegedly assaulted a black woman as she was trying to pick up her free panties. If you haven't seen this, I highly encourage you to go out on YouTube and watch the video. Again, if you're visual, me playing a clip here will never ever do it justice. You have to, you have to see it. Um, so at one point in the video, this woman appears to, she basically, as the video starts,